This is Connie Mason. It is December the 17th, 2010, and this is Cape Lookout National Seashore Oral History Program. And with me today is Mr. Dennis Chadwick. Dennis, great to have you here today.
It's good being here this morning.
All right. Well, listen, let's just start off with some personal things. Just maybe your name of your parents and where you're from.
From Straits, North Carolina. My father was a native of Straits. His name was Walter Chadwick. And he married a Marshburger, Evelyn Murphy. Her family had been in the Marshburg, Browns Island area for generations. And I was born in 45, and I've lived in Straits ever since.
Ever since. And tell me, the Chadwick name is one that goes back a long way, but it comes from someplace that we're akin to, but far off.
Well, actually, I've done quite a bit of research over the last 15, 20 years. I play around with genealogy. The family most recently immigrated from New England, Boston, Cape Cod, Nantucket area, around 1725 to do some whaling. The whaling didn't really turn out to be as profitable as they had hoped it would be. But I guess due to the climate, etc., they just decided to stay in North Carolina as opposed to going back to New England.
And a lot of the whaling was off of Shackelford.
Yes, it was. Actually, people don't realize it, but the early whaling was actually shore whaling as opposed to going offshore for weeks or months in ships and doing that type of venture. It's mostly just having to look out up on the beach, and whenever the designated spotter would spot a whale, they would go out in rowboats, harpoon the whale and bring to shore and do all the work right on the beach, as opposed to doing it on the ship. That really didn't come into effect from until the 1800s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you know if the women were somehow involved with that whole process?
Well, I know they were. I don't know the particular breakdown of the different shores of it, but I'm sure everybody had some aspect of breaking down the fat and rendering it, and because it was a community deal back then. That was a big deal to harpoon a whale and have the product and then getting the money. I do know from the original permit, we talk about taxes nowadays, but on the original permit that the Chadwick brothers and John Burnett got in 1725, etc., they even had to pay a 10% royalty to the king, to the crown, for the ivory and the oil. So I guess taxes have been forever.
Death and taxes are the only sure thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the Chadwicks, now they had a particular boat they came in on, didn't they? Was it the...
They brought their boats, but I don't know the name of the boat. And they came down, I think, with 2 or 3 probably small schooner type craft, but I never have seen. I've actually been in New England trying to research some of it, and unfortunately for that endeavor, the places I looked had less information than Carteret County. Carteret County is one of the better places on the East Coast for colonial records.
The 2 whaling vessels that I knew of were the Daniel Webster and the Seychelles. And the Daniel Webster's log is actually in Nantucket, but it's so full of mold you can hardly read it. And I don't know that they've done anything to it yet or not, but I'll just throw that out there for you to possibly go up there and take a look.
Yeah, I've not seen those. And I've actually been in Falmouth and done a lot of research, because the book written about the Chadwicks mentioned the village of Falmouth. And I've been in their historical society, and they really had no record of Samuel or Ephraim, or Ebenezer Chadwick, or John Burnett. And I've been to Nantucket. I only had just an hour or two there, so you can't do anything in that short time. But I really haven't been able to locate those four men where I was satisfied that was them.
Right.
Probably 90%, but I like to be 100% before I say that was them.
Absolutely. And the Chadwick family is very influential in the Straits and Gloucester, and I mean.
Well, early on, because they actually settled in Straits in the period of time that they came into. It was called Carteret Precinct, Bath County Carteret Precinct. They lived along the shoreline of. It was called the Straits of Corsine. That was the original name because it was. I've got some records of deeds that the Harkers had written, and it referred to it, that body of water, as the Straits of Corsine, which goes all the way from Sleepy Creek to North River. And at least two of the Chadwicks had patents on the Straits. Part of it was in what is now known as the Straits, near the Harkers Island Bridge, and the other one was in what is now known as Gloucester. The village of Gloucester has only been in existence 100 years. Mm-hmm. Back in 1800s, up the Straits, which is now Gloucester, Gayer Chadwick had a patent right on Whiter's Creek, which is on the Gloucester side of Whiter's Creek. But as I was referring to about the name change, old man Joe Piggott, he used to sail up into New England, and he wanted a post office on that end of the strait, and he liked going into Gloucester, Mass, so he picked the name Gloucester, Mass, and made it into Gloucester, North Carolina, and they got their post office on the upper end of Straits.
And Straits, as a community, is one of the oldest communities in the county, right?
Actually, it is, because in that time, transportation was by boat, and the Straits had good water, had a good channel. You could come from Beaufort Inlet, south through the edge of Backside, up the Straits, go into Corsine, go right on down to Cedar Island, get in Pamlico Sound, and that's how you actually got to New Bern back in those days, because there was no canal. This would have been in the early 1800s, but you could sail into Beaufort, and that would be the way that you could go to New Bern, or some of those other Belhaven and the Pamlico River, by coming that way. The other way would have been going into Portsmouth, Ocracoke Inlet, going across Pamlico Sound that way.
But going outside to get to Ocracoke Inlet, it was a little bit more tricky.
Yeah.
For a smaller craft, I guess.
Yeah, that's correct.
Well, tell me, you've been making your living the past, 10 years doing? Yeah,
the last 10, 11 years, I think in 98 or 99, we started Corsine Kayaks and Touring Company.
And we being?
Robin Chadwick and my wife. And at the time I was working for the North Carolina Ferry System, running from Cedar Island to Ocracoke. And a friend of mine, Michael O'Neill, had a kayak business, and I've been watching him rent boats, and they were coming in out of Silver Lake all summer long, and finally it dawned on me one day that this might be something that we could do down in the Straits, Harkers Island area. So I talked with Robin, and she was reluctant at first, but eventually she became gung-ho on the idea, and we got involved in it, and we did a fairly good seasonal tour and rental business.
Mm-hmm. And you're located right there at the new launch area by the horizontal bridge.
Yes, we're located a quarter of a mile from the Harkers Island Bridge and the Straits Landing boat ramp, and it's convenient for paddling along in the Straits, North River, back Sound, and you can paddle from there to Shackleford. So it's actually it's a great place to do eco tours and just to go for the fun of it, doing anything.
Mm-hmm. And the typical visitor that rents and wants a tour, what are they most interested in, Dennis? Everything, or just birds, or?
Well, most of them, during the summer months, from Memorial Day to Labor Day, is mostly family groups, and they like to expose their kids to the environment. Most of them had never been in salt water and never seen saltwater marsh grass. They've never seen a live crab and never picked up a clam. They don't know what a scallop looks like, because they call them scallops, but most of these people have never seen or much less touched any of these items, and we actually get a chance to go around to the west of the Harkers Island Bridge on those eelgrass beds, and I show them how to sign clams, or if they take their shoes off for a bit, to stomp for clams. And usually in that eelgrass we find scallops, because it's an ideal place for what few scallops are left. Of course, we always put them back. We'll make that clear, because it's illegal during that particular time anyway to harvest scallops. And we find hermit crabs and little blue crabs, and of course there's always plenty of herons and egrets flying around. So they really enjoy it. I've actually had people that I took on kayak tours that we got out and did that. And then one family in particular was so interested in catching the clams, they quit. They didn't want to go kayak anymore. They just wanted to catch clams and take them back to their apartment and steam clams that night.
Well, you can hardly blame them, can't you?
No, that saved me from having to paddle. They were just going, I was just watching them.
Yeah, well, that's great.
So it worked out well.
Did they give you any clams?
No, I could.
You can get all you want.
I could climb around them.
Are any of the people interested in you, as far as your background and maybe the way you speak or your language?
Occasionally, people do comment about it and want to know my ancestry and so forth, and I give them a little thing on that, and the early history, which I've sort of hinted at, mm-hmm. about fishing and just shipping, particularly wood products like lumber, shingles, agricultural products north, and then from New England getting clothing and shoes and whatever, mm-hmm. From there back into North Carolina. Mm-hmm. And I give them a little history on that, and the fact that I'm related to Ben Franklin. They find it rather, and then that's part of the Harker family, which probably not too many locals know about it unless.
Well, no, you've got to tell. I don't know how. I didn't know this story about you.
Well, the Harker family and the Gooding family and the Chadwicks and 2 or 3 other families all came out of New England between Cape Cod, like I said, and Boston and Nantucket about the same time, early 1700s. The Harker, old man Harker, Ebenezer Harker, bought what was known as Craney Island around this same period of time. And Harker's father was from Boston, and his mother was from Nantucket. His mother and her sister were Folgers, like the coffee maker, Folger.
Mm-hmm.
One was named Abby and the other one was Patience. I believe that were the two names. And I'm not sure who was married to Ebenezer Harker's father, but the other one, which was, in other words, Ebenezer's aunt would have been this other Folger woman. We'll say her name was Abby.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this Abby married a Mr. I don't remember his first name, Franklin from Boston. Anyway, the Franklin family and the Harker family were in-laws. Mm-hmm. So Miss Franklin and Mr. Franklin were Ebenezer's aunt and uncles, and so they had a son named Ben. So most of us know about Ben. And I'm sure
this is the Ben Franklin?
The Ben Franklin. And I feel sure that the guys that lived in Carteret County that were shipping, that would go north, particularly when they were young men, probably had run into Ben Franklin and his family. But I've never heard of Ben Franklin coming to Carteret County.
Well, now there's a story about Ben Franklin when Blackbeard was killed, that he was working for his brother, who was running a print shop or newspaper, and he wrote a what they call a ballad at the time about that, with some very pointed detail about what happened to Blackbeard. So I'm wondering if that's how he got his information, is that he...
Well, he probably did, because like I said, his cousins, he had quite a few cousins.
Down this area.
In what is now Harker's Island, because Craney Island became Harker's Island eventually. Mm-hmm. And the other little island beside Craney Island, which was still known as Craney Island until the early 1900s, that's when old man Julian Brown bought it. And that was part of the Harker, Chadwick, and Nelson's, because my grandmother was born on Brown's Island. Mm-hmm. Not a lot of local people even knew people lived there, but my grandmother and her 4 sisters and brother were raised on the northeast end of Brown's Island, up in the area of what is now known as Battery Hole. And I think primarily due to the fact that their dad wanted them to be able to get to school and not have to roam across the Straits every morning, moved to Marshallburg. Mm. And they lived near Polly's Hill in Marshallburg. But old man Julian Bryan, over about a 5-year period, brought all the family members out. They were Nelsons and descendants of Chadwicks and Goodings and Davises.
And that Battery Hole, that's that Confederate battery? Is that what they were talking about?
I think it might go before that. It might have been even back in the Revolutionary times. Of course, when we grew up, we thought it was a place where they used to throw boat batteries. But we determined that was just a name for a gun emplacement and to protect coarse iron.
And you talked to Bland Simpson about that, didn't you? In his
actually he did a little tour with us when he was working on a book he did several years ago, and he actually went up on the island and we pumped off Claude Bryan's water. He's got a hand pump. We went down to the shore and got a 5-gallon bucket of salt water, primed the pump, pumped it off for about 10 minutes, and we all drank water out of Claude's well.
How about that?
And it was great.
Wow. I had J.M. come in and he did some, pointed out to me let's see which map it is now. Got so many maps here. This is it. Yeah.
No, it's hard.
It's said this is about where the fort, he called it a fort. Back there, it was the one that went over to toward Marshallburg.
That's about right, of course. And that's in the vicinity of where my great-grandfather's house was. Julian J.M.'s father, who was also named Julian, actually three generations were Julian. The present J.M., who lives in Gloucester, his dad was named Julian, and his grandfather was named Julian. But J.M.'s father was the first one to tell me that my grandmother had been born on what is now Bryan's Island. Nobody in my family had ever told me. And I was over there camping with my cousin, and he walked us through the woods and showed us the foundation was still there.
How about that?
Now, that northeast part of the island has washed so much, those bricks are actually in the water. At high tide, all that's covered. But back then, it was like 100 yards from the shore, and that side of the island has washed tremendously.
Is this area of the northeast corner, is that the Battery Point? Is that what?
Yeah, Battery Hole is considered right in here between at least locally, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but between Bachelor's Island, the little island just to the north of this point, is that's a good place for clamming and oystering and it's shallow, but it's a good place. I think the name of the Bachelor's Island came from it was a Gooding married one of the Harker girls, and when they were young, I guess their grandfather or somebody in the family just called them the Bachelors, and they I think Matthew and John Gooding, I believe I'm correct, were given that little Bachelor's Island, a little Craney Island, but they called it Bachelor's Island. And of course, the older brother, the Matthew Gooding became a fairly well-known blockade runner during the American Civil War. He died at the age of 32, so he'd worked probably 10 years at sea for a shipping firm out of Charleston, South Carolina, running munitions and so forth for John A. Trenholm and Company. And he was two of my grandmothers are his great nieces. So anybody that was born on Bryan's Island, I was actually kin, like a lot of us. People are kin to more people than they know about because they haven't researched it like I do.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we don't always want to know who we kin to, but most of the time it's okay.
My father said, "Go back far enough, you'll find some galley slaves in our crowd."
Oh yeah.
Here's a big blow up of the Gloucester Whitehurst Creek, and are there any points on here that maybe are misnamed or local names that aren't named on here?
Just like this Crab Point, I've never heard of. That's where Jimmy Chadwick lives. I don't even know what another name would be, but this was generally the area that Samuel Chadwick had on a patent on the east side of Whitehurst Creek. This name, depending on what chart you looked at in the early 1900s, it either had Chadwick's Creek or Whitehurst Creek. And but most of these points on this particular chart are correct. And there was a number
was there a name of that creek?
That was
Dick's Creek?
That's Dick's Creek. And I got that from my cousin Lyda Piggott. And she's a Bernie now, but Actually, that area right outside of Dix Creek is one of the places that Otway Burns' ship, Snapdragon, could have been built. I know Miss Mary and Miss Georgie Whitehurst, who were great historians of the Down East area, they claim that the Snapdragon was built in that area.
How about that?
There's been some dispute about that, but that's their claim, and I believe them because they weren't prone to lie. But I do know for a fact, and I've seen it in official documentation, that the Snapdragon had been in the Straits and anchored for days doing some replenishing or outfitting or repair or something. But I've actually seen that in official documents because it did have good water in the channel, and it's a lot of fairly good sized boats for the time would use that, because if you knew your navigation, knew your channels, you could get, like I said earlier, from Beaufort Inlet through Core Sound into Pamlico Sound and then up into the interior cities of the coast.
Now, is the Straits more navigable than back Sound?
Yeah, actually, people don't realize this, but it wasn't until probably the middle 50s that there was ever a channel from the northeast corner of Browns Island down the east side of Harker's Island going towards the Cape, because the inlet at Cape Lookout, as you know, wasn't even there until the 33 hurricane. So there was no deep water channel there. There was just some places deeper than others, but it was no official channel. So people didn't go on the south side of Harker's Island, on the east side of it, unless they were just out fishing. They didn't navigate intentionally to go anywhere unless it was just a little local venture.
So it might make a lot of sense, you know, they talk about the Indians at Shell Point trying to make a walkway to the banks there, that it was probably shallow enough that they could start something.
Yeah, it's except for, like I said, the Corps of Engineers dredged that channel to the east of Shell Point in the 50s. I think, I don't know, it was Congressman or Senator Barden, I believe it was. The inlet was named after him at some time, was instrumental in getting the funds to dredge that channel from the edge of the south end of the Core Banks, Core Sound Straits corner to all the way to the Cape. Then they cut a channel on the south side of Harker's Island. There was some deep water there, but it wasn't connected all the way to the present channel.
Now, a lot of the homes on Harker's Island were on the back Sound side. Is that right? Or?
Yeah, actually, most of the homes on Harker's Island, probably a lot of them came from Shackleford Banks. Of course, it was on the warmer side. On the breeze in the summer, it was breezy on the Sound or the back Sound side, and it was closer for them to get to Shackleford to fish because they had moved off of Shackleford due to hurricane damage to their homes, and so
Well, that makes a lot of sense.
a big part of them relocated on Harker's Island, and it was just a short jaunt across back. It's only like 2.5 miles across the Sound to Shackleford, and from there, of course, back Sound itself is a good fishing area, and Core Sound is too. And if they want to go to the ocean, they'd have a skiff already on Shackleford, because you couldn't drag a skiff across the island.
Too much.
Of course, they could go down to where the inlet is now, the area they call the drain, I imagine a lot of them went down that way because it was a closer haul from the waterside, right in that little point, and get to the ocean side. It was like a little trickle ditch down there that never really connected, I suppose. At least I heard it wasn't.
But people could walk across it at low tide
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So it was, but still was a little barrier between the two.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn this over because we're about. All right. And we were talking about people coming over from, how they were going back and forth between Shackelford and Parker's Island after particularly the 1899 storms,
Right.
when they came and brought their houses over. And you wanted to talk a little bit about windmills. And do you know the location of some of the local windmills?
Actually, I do. From some of the research I've done, I've spent a lot of time in the library and the register of deeds and so forth, and looking up documents. I find a tremendous amount of information just off the old deeds where it would refer to a windmill as a point of reference to a land corner. And I just found this out a couple of years ago of one by the Harkers Island Bridge. I knew there was one on the family property and a subdivision that was developed in the 50s called Straits Haven. Mm-hmm. Right on the shore of that creek, which is now known as Myrtle Creek, but on the west side of Myrtle Creek.
Is it on this map? Or
yeah, it's right. It's actually just about, it's right here. Right there. Just right now.
Sure.
When I was a teenager, the griststones from the windmill, it was my great-grandfather and his brother owned the mill, and they referred to it as the Chadwick brothers. It was Alfred Hatch Chadwick, and my great-grandfather was James Chadwick. But when me and a cousin of mine, Joe Chadwick, were playing on the shore, we just run across those griststones all the time, not even think about it. And it wasn't until years later when I was talking to the man that owned the particular piece of land that the stones were on, Norman Chadwick, who was a cousin and a high school science teacher of mine. I'll give you my version of this story.
Okay, this is yours. Okay.
In the late 50s, I believe it was, they dredged out this little shallow creek, and they were developing the land on the east side of the creek. And so Wallace Garner, who had a construction company, a landscaping company, dug out this creek, which is now known as Myrtle Bay. But Norman didn't want those stones to be destroyed, so they were on his land, and he loaned them to the guy in Beaufort. There's a great historian who's now passed away, and his son still does the bus tour.
Graydon
Paul.
Paul. Mm-hmm.
And the older man was named.
Well, that was Graydon Paul.
Okay.
They're both namesakes.
Anyway, Norman let Graydon Paul take the stones to Beaufort, and on Front Street in Beaufort, right near the post office, was the old
Alfonso.
one of the last known Sharpie, Alfonso.
Yeah.
And they laid on the shore right beside this museum for years and years and years, and finally, I think somebody, for whatever reason, I think they burned the Alfonso.
Yes, they did. It was a control burn. It was a practice for the.
So anyway, that Sharpie's gone, and but they moved the stones over to the grounds where the apothecary shop is, and the old Beaufort Jail. As a matter of fact, they're laying right on the southwest corner of the jail, the foundation of the jail right now.
I've seen them, yeah.
But I
didn't know where they came from, though.
They belong to my great-grandfather, James Chadwick, and they've been in Beaufort for 40 years, but they actually belong to the Chadwick family. And just to the west of where these stones were, and I didn't know this until recently, there was a windmill right at the foot of the Harkers Island Bridge. It was a land division between David Whitehurst and my great-great-grandfather, John Chadwick. And the point of the land division, referred to as David Whitehurst's windmill, the stake was staked by David Whitehurst's windmill and then running north 4 degrees, X number of poles to the back of the patent line, which the patent line was up by the Leffers Brooks plantation, which is now still in existence. So there was a windmill there, and the one that I referred to earlier, there was one at Whitehurst Creek, Chadwick Creek, where Samuel Chadwick had property, and that was...
Do you know about where that was on this map?
That was right in here. You've probably heard of this, but there was a Murphy, retired, I don't know if he's Merchant Marine or retired Coast Guard. He had a piece of property with a flagpole. The flagpole was sitting in the center where the hole is for the griststone. And, but they were, I think, Samuel Chadwick or his son Gayer Chadwick's grist mill, which sat right here on the east side of Whitehurst Creek. And the other one I find out for looking at old deeds.
Let's put an X there. Whoop.
The other one was in Marshallburg, just about where Milton Willis's boathouse was located. Some documents I've seen. It's actually right out here near the point. It's right out near the county dock. I referred to it going up in the county dock before now there's a park there.
Okay.
But right in that area was a windmill, because that area, as we're looking at this map, you get wind there from the east, south, west, and a little bit of northwest. So actually, even from that point, you can get it almost out of the north. So it's a great place for a windmill. But looking at some old geodetic maps, I've got a chart program that I'm not sure who presented it. It might have been North Carolina Archives. Hundreds of North Carolina charts are available, and it shows that point as a windmill point. So, and I've also read it in Indeed, so there was a windmill there. So I know of at least 4 windmills, and of course the windmills were for to grind corn. We didn't have flour here, but we had plenty of cornbread. We had a lot of cornbread. Batter for making for, I guess they probably fried spots and mullets and whatever forever. And but anyway, that's one of my interests has been the windmills, along with Sharpies.
Yeah.
Because my friend, or our friend Sonny Williamson, we've been interested in Sharpies and spritzel skiffs for years now, and doing research on those, and that was another craft that came out of New England in the 1800s, and it ended up coming into North Carolina probably in the late 1800s, and it worked out real well because they're shallow watercraft, and we have plenty of shallow water in Carteret County.
On Harper's Island, there was a windmill. Do you know anything about that one?
I think it was over here on Zachary. I think this end was Zachary Harper's, and somewhere out on this point, which is now referred to as Harper's Point, was a windmill. Mm-hmm. And he was one of my great grandfathers also, because the Chadwicks and the Harkers had married in the 1700s, and that's how I'm kin to Ben Franklin also, through the Harkers and the Chadwicks.
I ask everybody this because, and you studied, and I haven't had much success, but they say the first menhaden plant in North Carolina was on Harper's Island. Have you heard about where it might have been?
No, I've heard that too, and I don't know much about it, but I think I can't. Goodwin.
Steve
Goodwin, who's done the research on the boats and so forth.
Mm-hmm. He'd be the one to ask.
I talked to him recently about some things, about a project I think it's finished, about docks and boat anchorages and so forth, and he'd done some work on menhaden plants, and I think he did mention that probably around this same area. Because the advantage of Harker's Point area, it was right off the channel going in the Straits, so it was deep water, just within a real short distance of Harker's Point, and of course right behind Harker's Point was that little creek in there, so it was protection for small craft, and then within no time you could be out in deep water and get over to Beaufort or out in the inlet.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Going back to Shackelford just a minute, do you remember growing up where some of the camps were and who owned them or that kind of thing?
Actually, I'm not.
Was that
I'm not really too keen on the Shackelford deal. Some of the Ella Shomans or Ari Lewis or one of those guys.
They'd be the one to
Ari actually just gave me some information. I think it was last year when we were down at the Waterfowl Museum right here about the history on Gorman Holland's camp. I never had heard this before, and Ari swore that it'd be a fact, and because I know he's right. But during World War II, the Coast Guard built a little place for the Coast Guard crew to get out of the weather, which is down on which would be in the east end of the present Maritime Forest, there on the Shackelford Banks. And of course, that eventually came into not being useful, and Gorman Holland bought it from the Coast Guard, and it became Gorman Holland's camp, and there's still some pilings that are remained of the original camp, and before that, the Coast Guard station. Because the deal was between the Cape Lookout Lighthouse area and Beaufort Inlet, which has a 9 or 10 mile stretch. There was no Coast Guard establishment, so they wanted something about midway the island during the war. So they put up that little housing project, right, that little building, and that's why that was there.
Did they pour concrete and have some piping and stuff? I've seen some pictures of some concrete and things on the ocean side, which I didn't know where in the world that came from or what it was.
I'm not familiar with that. Ari would most likely know that. He's very close to being the oldest person on the island now. He's at least 90, and
He's
an excellent.
92. He's 92, and he was just here the other day, just as spry.
Yeah, he has an excellent memory.
Yeah, hearing not so good, but everything else is spot on, I think.
But he can give you idea on the camps around Wade Shore. I know Dr. Moore even had a camp, and you can still, if you go through some myrtle bushes and fight off some mosquitoes up on, it's a really high spot, which they hauled in some shells and made a nice lawn, and they actually have some remnants of mainland grass. So not just junk grass, but actually some, or something like, it's not centipede, but it's something similar to a centipede type grass that he planted over there, and it looks really nice.
How about that? And did you have any personal experiences with the horses over there?
No, I grew up. I didn't really have that much chance getting over. I grew up on a farm. My family was in the farming and store business, and the first piece of equipment I ever drove was an Alice Chalmers tractor. And my uncle, who had no boy young'uns, I didn't know him, but he was using me at the time for his agricultural adventure. And but between,
where was the farm?
The farm was actually when you come off the Harkers Island Bridge, all that land on both sides of the road of the Harkers Island Bridge.
Let's see, where is that?
Actually, here's a remnant of it, but it only shows the shoreline. But all this land right in here was Chadwick property. And from the bridge all the way up near the curve, as you're going north on the Harkers Island Road, was all cultivated. Corn, sweet potatoes. And of course, I find this kind of funny. When we were growing up, the item that most people call Irish potatoes or white potatoes, we grew up calling them Arsh potatoes. I thought it was a different, because
Arsh?
Arsh. It was a remnant of Old English, Elizabethan English, I suppose, where they dropped a lot of the first part of the word, because it was easier to say, as J.M. Brown and Jim Willis can tell much more of that story about how they said the words to make it easy to say. But nobody down east ever called a white potato an Irish potato. I never heard it in my life until I went off to school, and they would question what I was talking about. So, these things right here, these Irish potatoes. So anyway, I learned later that they were Irish potatoes.
Tell me about your schooling.
Well, I graduated from Smyrna in '64, and I was debating on where to go to school, and the only place I actually put in a legitimate request was the NC State. And by some miracle, they accepted me. I'm not sure why. I just had average grades, but I was accepted. And but between '64 and when I started in the fall of '65, I worked with my Uncle David Chadwick at the North Carolina State Port Authority for Morehead City Shipping Company, which we loaded freighters primarily for Japan and Germany, mostly tobacco and lumber. So that was a learning experience for me. I worked 1.5 years at the port, and that was a great experience because I had a chance to meet people from a lot of European countries and Asia and so forth. But anyway, in the fall of '65, I went up to Raleigh, and of course that was a really an eye-opener for me, because I'd only ever spent a couple of nights away from Carteret County in my life, and that was maybe as far as Kinston, and that was really a trip back in those days. And so anyway, I majored in outdoor recreation, and recreation up until that time had been mostly PE type, sports oriented, football, basketball, tennis, whatever. But in the early 60s, NC State was one of the first schools to understand the environmental recreation, camping, hiking, boating, where ecological things were important recreational endeavors. So me and about a half a dozen guys went into outdoor recreation, the environmental side.
Wow.
And so I did the environmental aspect and graduated in '69. But I immediately became involved in the military, as opposed, or in conjunction with the war, Vietnam War.
Did you get drafted?
I technically got drafted, but also technically got out and went in the Coast Guard. I had a letter from Mr. Nixon. He invited me, and I said, well, I don't know if I like the Army as good as being on the water, because I catch poison ivy. That was my excuse. I catch poison ivy too easy. So the Coast Guard recruiter in Moorhead, he made a phone call and got me in the Coast Guard. He asked me if I could be at the post office in Moorhead on the morning of August the 15th, about 5 a.m. He said, the bus will be here and you better be on it. I said, well, I'll be there. And so I went to Cape May and did my boot camp training for the Coast Guard, and I spent 3 years on Coast Guard cutters between Cuba and Nova Scotia, and actually, before I went on the first cutter, after boot camp, I went to quartermaster, which is a navigational rate for the Navy, and signaling school, which at that time the Coast Guard quartermaster was the visual signaling person and the navigator on the ships. So I went to school in Newport, Rhode Island for 3 months. And then I was on a ship, 2 different ships for 3 years. And, of course, in the Florida area, we were involved in the last of the Cuban refugee deals coming into the U.S. And then in New England, I was on the tail end of the foreign fishing fleet when they could come up within 12 miles, up to 12 miles off of the New England coast. People would be amazed in the early 70s how many foreign fishing ships were off of New England any one time. One afternoon, real nice afternoon, was off of Nantucket, probably 10, 12 miles, and we were just sort of drifting. And real nice evening, just before sunset, I started at the bow of the boat, and I started counting from the bow all the way to the stern and back to the bow on the other side. I counted 60 different foreign fishing ships at one time.
60?
Yeah, and these guys would fish day and night, 7 days a week.
So they were factory ships.
Well, they would unload. These boats were mostly anywhere from like 150 feet to 250 feet long, hauling trawls. They would unload after several days on a factory ship, and that boat would be like 500 or 600 feet long. Mm. And they were usually tied up to the factory ship for part of a day. Of course, they would also unload their wires and pick up supplies, food and drink, because they had to have their vodka.
So these were mostly Russian?
Well, big part of them were Soviet bloc ships, Russian, Lithuanian, Bulgarian, Austrian, some Spanish, a few English, a few French, and it was just an eye-opener for me how many vessels were hauling all the time off Cape Cod and other places too. Because Cape Cod, George's Banks, and Nantucket Shoals were some of the best fishing area probably in the Atlantic Ocean, North Atlantic.
Yeah. And our fishermen got blamed for the depletion.
Oh yeah, but anyway, as a result of all this navigational experience I had, when I got out, I tried to get work with the Cape Lookout National Seashore, which was brand new, but they only had 2 people working, the superintendent and the secretary, and she was, I don't know, full-time or not. And the office at the time was in Front Street in Beaufort, which is now, I think, a Century 21 office.
You're right.
And so anyway, I had to pursue other endeavors, and eventually went to work for the North Carolina Ferry System and got my captain's license. And so the Coast Guard time paid off for me having a career in ferry boating on Pamlico Sound, which turned out to be, it's a great job. Met a lot of people from all over the country. And
how long were you there?
I was out on Pamlico Sound 20 years. So I got to know just about everybody in Ocracoke.
I bet you so. I bet so.
And it's still one of my favorite, the people there are some of my favorite people in the world.
Absolutely. Me too. What, do you have a favorite story that we're about out of tape, about crossing over? You know, is there a story that's amazing to you or just sticks with you?
There were so many. Of course, I've been retired 7.5 years, going on 8 years now, and I don't think there's a particularly item, at least not one I can repeat.
Okay, I understand.
But anyway, there was a lot of. We had to go a number of times to rescue, because in the merchant marine, if you're in an official merchant marine vessel, if you know of a search and rescue or a maritime emergency, you're supposed to go to it if you can get to it. And we did that a number of times, either shrimp boats, 70 or 80 foot shrimp boats sinking or on fire or somebody hurt. Because we've actually at times had to take people off of a shrimper and take them ashore with us, somebody that was hurt really bad. And at times we had the Coast Guard helicopter come to our boat and download a basket on our boat and take people off.
Because it was easier probably than a smaller
Yeah, they
trawler.
couldn't really, with the outrigging on a shrimp trawler, they couldn't get to it. So we'd clear out a place on the bow or the stern of the ferry, which was 220 feet long. But one of my most memorable things, which fortunately I didn't see it in the coast, we acted as a reference point for it was probably the Ocracoke Coast Guard or Hatteras, went to sort of a homemade shrimping rig off of Cedar Island. A woman had her arm caught in the rigging and cut her arm off. And her husband was talking. This was at night, like around 10 o'clock at night. And every time the husband would come on and pass information, you could hear the woman in the background screaming, and that was very eventful. But we acted as the beacon for the Coast Guard boat and the helicopter to come to them that night. And a friend of mine from Atlantic, he got so he couldn't even. He had to get off the wheel. He was steering. He had to go down below because it bothered him so bad he couldn't listen to that woman screaming. But there's been not a lot, but a few critical where people have died on shrimp boats, fallen overboard, or get caught in a net and in a winch. And boating is dangerous.
It is. Fishing is dangerous. Well, listen, Dennis, you've been wonderful, and I thank you so much for coming out. And I hope you and yours have a happy Christmas and a good New Year. And maybe in January we can come back and talk some more.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And hopefully it's going to be a good move, but we're taking off a few days after Christmas and going south to Ocala now. I understand they had some cold weather the other day, but hopefully I don't have to wear my pea coat.
There you go. Okay. Tell Robin I said hello.